I'm competing against healthcare newsletters. I'm competing against a lot of different things that are out there that are trying to capture my buyer's attention. You're only going to open up so many emails. You're only going to watch so much different content.
It's with great pleasure that we welcome James Furbush to the Growth Game. James currently working VP of Marketing AccessOne, which is in kind of the healthcare SaaS space. But I think it's fair to say you've kind of run the full gamut of audience engagement. You've kind of done a little bit of everything. So I guess to start off with, do you want to talk to us a little bit about your evolution as a content creator and a marketer and how you find yourself where you do just now?
Yeah, it's been kind of a wild ride. I think if you had asked me when I started my career, would I end up as a sort of marketing executive, I probably would have laughed hysterically. I started my career actually as a teacher and sort of then wound my way into, I ended up being a journalist is kind of where I started my actual career, working for local newspapers here kind of in the Boston area. And then from there, even, early days in, when I started the newspaper, it was kind of clear that the writing was on the wall. If you wanted to be a journalist, we'll call it the traditional career path as a journalist, which is you work at a tiny little newspaper, you move your way up to the big city paper. Maybe you get the chance to work at a national publication, depending on your beat, was just about good as dead, right? I mean, I think probably about like 2 months into working at a newspaper, at my kind of role in the newspaper, it was like, oh, geez, like if I don't learn how to build websites and do kind of some digital stuff, my career is going to be extinct before it even starts. And so very early on, I sort of recognized that obviously the internet, that was obviously where things were heading, and quickly started to sort of teach myself how to build websites, blogs, do social media, anything that I could honestly to stay relevant. And sort of a lot of those skills from that early time period ended up translating into this sort of marketing career, which is I was hired by a company here in the Boston area called Athena Health to run their blogs and social media back in like 2013. And they were like, hey, we're going to pay you a lot of money. At the time, it felt like a lot of money, more money than I would make in journalism, certainly. And they were like, we want to put your editorial skills to good use. Come kind of work for us to run blogs and social and do some stuff. And that's honestly how I find myself working in marketing, was just this B2B company wanted to kind of hire someone with media and marketing skills to create content and build audiences and sort of nurture their buyers. And so now I've sort of been in this 10-year run in sort of marketing, but sort of doing very similar things that I was always wanted to do in my journalism career, just doing it now for B2B companies.
It's funny you say that the writing was on the wall as soon as you started journalism. I mean, I started journalism in 2015 and I went into an office. I was the only person that worked in there. There were like 5 empty desks, so I could just move around. It was a bit bleak. But I wonder, like, over that time period, like, how would you say like the nature of engaging audiences has changed? Because obviously the way we consume media and we consume messages, be they editorial or advertising in nature, like, how have you seen it change? Like, do you think it's a completely different game to what it was back then?
I don't think it's like an entirely different game. I think if it is different, I think there has been a sort of democratization of how people consume information. Before, it's like, if you lived in a certain geographic area, you probably only had access to certain physical newspapers, right? Maybe you got some magazines shipped in your mailbox. And so I think now the biggest difference is that like anyone can kind of be a publisher, anyone can be a journalist. They have the tools, the publishing tools are available to anyone. So that I think has been the biggest change, is that the barrier to entry for anyone to start a publication is almost zero. The costs are very minimal. I think, you and I, the three of us, if we wanted to, we could probably go spin up a website, a publication. Probably by the time this conversation ended, we could have something live that looked pretty darn good, pretty convincing. And so that's one of the biggest changes. And then I think secondly, just sort of multimedia, video, right? Podcast, audio, I think are more important than ever. I mean, most of my media is probably consumed in some way, shape, or form through YouTube. Right. It's like ESPN on
Yeah.
YouTube, this person on like whatever it is. And so I think sort of that importance of video to be able to share information and do reports and sort of the fact that like anybody can do it, I think are the biggest changes. But ultimately, I think the sort of skills that you need in terms of like telling an engaging story, how to put that together, sharing information, knowing where to find reliable information. I think a lot of those skills are still the same. I think a good story now is still a good story then. It's just anyone can do it, and you should probably be doing it on YouTube.
You still need the skills because if everyone can do it, then it means that everyone could become like a storyteller or writer.
Yeah.
So it's a good way for the best ones to stand out, if you know
Yes.
what I mean? Because we were talking about the fact that anyone can become a publisher or anyone can start a news website. But it's also the fact that now the audience, they've got everything available at their fingertips. When before, as you said, you would need like a subscription to a magazine to get it. But now you can have like hundreds of magazines just on your phone.
Yeah. And I think that makes everybody better, right? Like I think tech reporting and tech content is better because Marquise Brownlee, as a 14-year-old was able to start a YouTube channel that has grown to be super popular, right? Like, I think like he is someone who is a phenomenal content creator and I would call him a journalist. And his career might not have existed 15 or 20 years ago. He has come along at the right place at the right time. I think an entertainer like Mr. Beast, who obviously we don't have to talk about, he needs no introduction probably for most people at this point. But again, someone who is making kind of these funny, like entertaining videos and, sometimes having a little more seriousness behind it, some of the longer form stuff that he does about, giving away money and different things. I think that forces everybody, even serious journalists and serious publications and B2B companies to be better at what they do, right? Like the way that I think about my content, like I'm not competing against the other companies that we're trying to win business against. In an attention economy, like I'm actually competing against other healthcare publications. I'm competing against healthcare newsletters. I'm competing against a lot of different things that are out there that are trying to capture my buyer's attention. And attention is scarce, right? It's like you're only going to open up so many emails. You're only going to watch so much different content. And so for me, when you think about audience building now, it's before it's like you cared about your competitors. But when people are like, are you doing a competitor analysis? And I'm like, well, are we talking about companies that we're selling against? Or are we talking about like other healthcare publications that are vying for the eyeballs and attention of our buyer? That's a really significant shift, I think, as far as like content creation and marketing kind of
Yeah, that scarcity of attention is absolutely key. It's like, how do you stand out? How do you make your content the stuff that they actually end up consuming? So what do you kind of like incorporate in like the healthcare tech space for that?
Yeah, well, I mean, fortunately for us, like the bar is set very low in healthcare. So
Right.
um, like terribly, terribly low, which
How
sometimes makes
come? Why?
well, so the thing about like healthcare, and especially in the US, is I feel like just the industry in general, there's sort of that like, adoption curve, right? And I feel like healthcare is just lags behind technology and certainly in marketing. It's like when I look at like what our competitors are doing, it's like everything is still gated. With like I'll get emails from competitors that drive to like this gated thing, and I'm like, why is this shitty blog post behind a gate? Like that makes no sense. Like, and also you send it to me via email. So like, like you have my email. There's no reason to like hide this piece of content that might be useful for me. Like you've just created this sort of friction experience. But I think for healthcare, generally speaking, as an industry, specifically in marketing too. There are some good companies out there, don't get me wrong, but by and large, it's a slow industry to change. And that is particularly in sort of the marketing approach. So for me, that means like even just doing something different, like doing YouTube shorts, doing a podcast. We're not on like TikTok or Instagram, but we certainly could be, like doing some of that stuff that is almost like table stakes for like MarTech companies and like other industries that like have to do good marketing. So for us, it's a little bit like, we can do something like a podcast, we can be on YouTube, we can do ungated content. And that feels like downright like revolutionary in healthcare, just because of, how far behind everybody is.
Must be kind of nice, eh? Like for a bit in terms of like executing on your job, if everyone else is kind of like playing in the shallow pool, being able to, go out and swim in the sea.
So it is and it isn't, right? It's like sometimes one of the challenges, like you're kind of too far out ahead of the curve. So for instance, like leadership is still like, how are the leads coming in, right? Like, do you have whatever? And when you're kind of like, look, we're more focused on inbound demo requests and we're going to capture whatever, and we don't care about low quality leads. I think there is still some of that education at play when you're like, we're trying to play a little bit of a different game. Can be a challenge, but it is exciting when you are sort of like, but here's how we're going to do it. And we're going to be doing it a little bit different than kind of how everyone else is doing it. Once you can kind of do that managing up to get leadership kind of bought in, I think, yeah, it is exciting.
And is it not because healthcare has to be careful and cautious about how they move forward with things? Because we can see it with our gamification customers. Like most of the time, like marketing are always upfront, like leading the thing. Tech companies as well.
There's probably a lot of that. Look, a lot of our companies, not us specifically, but who we sell to, the industry, just generally speaking, it's a well-regulated industry. At least in the US, we've got patient information laws, protection laws, data security. There is a lot of dealing
compliance,
with compliance and all of that. And, for us, like certainly there are times where I have to make sure like I'm in lockstep with our legal team, right? Where it's like, if you want to do a patient testimonial, we definitely need a media release. And so, yeah, I think there are times where just by and large, it's a little bit easier to use that like as a crutch, right? I think it's you can kind of use that as justification for moving slower. Certainly like on the hospital health system side, I think, because they are super regulated versus, we're just like a vendor in the healthcare space, selling. So yeah, I think that's probably part of why it moves more slowly, but at the same time, it doesn't necessarily like have to be that way. But that's probably why.
Play a quick game.
Yeah.
So that's yeah. So okay, we've got a couple of quick fire question rounds. They're always themed around what our guest does. So we're going to play a game called Don Draper's DeLorean. Let me paint a picture for you, James. You wake up tomorrow, but it's January 1st, 2004. And while you have all your memories and professional experience when it comes to audience engagement, you're in the body of a rookie marketing executive for a firm who are consulted by all the biggest brands making the most popular consumer goods. So, question 1, the body of the marketing executive you've taken over is under pressure from his bosses to change the game on a big account within 3 months, or beat it and find a new game. With all your knowledge and experience, what marketing strategy would you implement for a popular product or service of that time to rewrite marketing history? Please consider the technological limitations of the era, but also any untapped opportunities.
Yeah.
Take a big sip of that coffee.
What's that?
I said, take a big sip of that coffee. It was a big question.
So what I keep coming back to is honestly, I'd probably just blow all my money on a Super Bowl commercial. Sadly, because Because I think like in 2004, it's like weird to think about that time period in the world where like Facebook didn't exist. I don't even think like Google Ads existed. So like all the tools that we like take for granted now in B2B marketing like didn't exist. And so like when I keep coming back to them, like in 2004, I'm like, was it magazines? Like I think people advertised like in magazines. Like I think at that time, the biggest game changer for a lot of like brands was like, blow all the budget on a Super Bowl commercial, like try to get people talking about your brand, like on the biggest when like the entire world is watching. It's probably not the best strategy and it probably would get me fired 3 months later. But like that's what I keep coming back to is probably just go big and then go home. But like go big
feast of famine
on a great Super Bowl commercial that like everyone's going to keep talking about for the entire year.
Google Ads was only 4 years old. Google Ads has been released in 2000.
It was. Okay, well then I'd probably change it a little bit. I'd probably bet on search and like Google Ads, but I'd still also do the Super Bowl commercial and maybe have some ads. So when people go and maybe search for that Super Bowl ads, they could at least kind of come back and find our website very easily.
So you don't get fired. That's
I
a
don't get
much
fired.
better
Yeah,
strategy.
exactly.
It's funny how you talk about like we take all the tools for granted. Have you noticed how now we're looking at pictures from the early 2000s and they are starting to look dated? And it's like, it's kind of really jarring.
I mean, it's super jarring, and it's also like it's hard to fathom. Like if you sent someone back in time, even just to 2004, and they've only known the iPhone or whatever, like Android or whatever, like they would not be able to navigate that world in 2004. They wouldn't know how to find directions to get anywhere. You'd be like, yeah, here's this big atlas in the library. Like go write down, like go figure out directions and like write them down. Like if you wanted to call someone, you had to like rely on a payphone in the mall. Like it was a completely like Wild West world. And it is like really hard to think about that just given, I think, like how different the world is now, just simply because of like, constant connectivity to the internet and like mobile devices. I mean, really has created an entirely different way in which like people navigate the world around them.
Wow. So it's a good job you added the Google search bit, because post campaign, you wake up in the same body, but now the year is 2030. You're running the company, but it's in trouble. Predict a major marketing trend in 2030 that you can get ahead of to save the firm once again.
And I think within 5 years, if I were doing it, I would honestly probably leverage like streaming ad platforms. Every streaming platform is moving towards an ad-based model because they have shown out, they have the data. I think it's like Netflix has the data to prove that like a customer who is on the ad networks are worth more than the customers who are on paying more, but on the ad-free subscription. Okay. So then that is where things are heading. All of those platforms, Disney, HBO, whatever, Netflix, they're all going to push people towards that. And if you look at the ads on those right now, it is just these really shitty pharma and like insurance ads, right? They're just like really bad direct to consumer ads, but there are like ad platforms out there. I think like Mountain MNTN is one of them where you can create ads and target on streaming platforms with the same targeting that you would get on LinkedIn or Google or YouTube or any of these other distribution platforms. And so if I'm a brand thinking about how do I reach people, reach them with good targeting when they are just like watching Netflix at night, when your potentially very different B2B brand ad is going to get served up alongside something that, like a farmer or something, right? It's going to stand out. And so I think like in the next 5 years, if I were a B2B brand, I mean, that right now to me is, I think, still like an untapped distribution area. Because I think it's it's going to be a big, obviously, direct to consumer place, certainly. So there's definitely, just by being a B2B brand in that channel, you have a chance to stand out from your competitors.
Yeah.
That's a good one. Yeah.
That was a really good answer, actually. Okay, we'll move on to the main questions. And I think something we kind of let slip by. Do you want to just quickly explain exactly what AccessOne does? I think quite a unique business that could only really exist in the United States.
For
So,
good or bad, I suppose. So before I explain what AccessOne does, I'll just take a quick step back and just set a little bit of context for, say, your non-US listeners and watchers. So in most civilized countries, you have like a single payer healthcare system, right? Like healthcare is not by and large something that is going to bankrupt you. You can go get care. It's very affordable and you kind of move on with your life, because I think a lot of countries have recognized that healthcare is all right, the cost of which should not like bankrupt people. Well, the US, by and large, still has a very kludgy way in which we pay for care. And most of those costs have been shifted towards the patient. And so in the US, healthcare is very expensive. It's medical costs are the number one cause of bankruptcy. Even just a regular trip to the doctor can be something that financially sets the average person back horribly, right? You could walk out of just a regular doctor's with $1,000 bill, and if you don't have that budgeted in, your monthly budget or whatever, oftentimes that is something you can't even just pay for all at once. It causes stress in the whole thing. So yeah, so AccessOne is probably a company that can only exist in the US, but we're a very mission-driven company, and the idea is that we are trying to help people be able to afford their care and do that in a way that is not going to bankrupt you. And so we partner with hospitals and health systems to take those very large bills that patients could get. And we have basically two products. We essentially allow patients, they can pay for care in full, buy now, pay later. Like you can pay in 4 payments, or you can break it up, break your bill up if you need like a 12-month payment. If you have a really catastrophic bill and you have to like really kind of stretch that out so that you can manage sort of that monthly payment for your family. And so we have a sort of mobile payment product where it's essentially text to pay. We can like text your bill to your phone and you can just pay right on your phone through Apple Pay. Or if it's a large bill, you can opt into that sort of extended payment plan, like right from your mobile device, and kind of manage those payments and things like that. So we are in the patient payment space within the US kind of healthcare. And we basically try to make it easy for patients to pay their bill, whether that's just paying it on their mobile device, or if they need a little bit more time and help to pay for their care, we make it easy for them to pay for that over time.
Cool. So I guess like in that kind of healthcare tech space, like who specifically is your audience then? Because are you appealing to the end user, or does this go through like an intermediary? And also like what are kind of like the newest techniques you're using to get kind of the message across, and like what's kind of working for you?
Yeah. So our buyer it's kind of like a wonky title. So within healthcare in the US, a lot of the financial, like patient billing and a lot of the billing stuff falls under like the CFO, and this department called like the revenue cycle management team, which is like a very wonky title and like whatever. Won't go into that, but we're basically, we sell to like the CFO and the people that report to the chief financial officer within a hospital or health system. And it's a hard channel. I think like, we try a lot of different things. Organic LinkedIn has worked well for us just in terms of building an audience, newsletter. So we have a newsletter that we kind of send out once a month, and it's very non-promotional. There are a few like financial organizations that do trade shows, and they do kind of regional, national, whatever. And so a lot of our buyers still go to these events to stay on top of mind and network and learn. And so being there and having a strong events strategy is still an important one for us. So yeah, we're always experimenting to find out where our buyer is. I think what we find is things like our podcast that's geared towards our audience does well, but it's sometimes hard to tell in the analytics, hey, is our buyer actually listening to it? Or is it like a bunch of random people like my mom's friends who are trying to support me, and keep me not fired from my job. And so that's a challenge, right? Like YouTube Shorts, for instance, do really well for us, but it's like we can't really tell, like, is it our buyer and stuff like that. Certainly some of those channels, newsletters and email where we have the data of like who is subscribing and who is getting that and who is opening, knowing that we're reaching our buyer. Trade shows, again, do really well for us still. So I think what we do is we try to focus our efforts, definitely where we know where our buyer is going to be, while we're always sort of testing different channels to figure out, are some of these different platforms and things, will they work for us? So it's a mix, but sadly, trade shows and healthcare still really good.
You talk about the buyer, and the buyer obviously isn't the end user. But I wonder, like, is there value in sort of like getting through to sort of patients, people who could, potentially need like your services, if they're not the people, if they can't exercise any control over ultimately opting to use AccessOne? Because obviously you've got your podcast, the Modern Patient Experience.
Yeah.
I presume that seems like it's almost trying to appeal to kind of like quite a broad church kind of section of that.
Yeah. So the strategy there is like, we think of ourselves as we're improving like the patient financial experience within healthcare. And so in order to drive awareness, we take it like one level up. And so we have a podcast, and our show is broadly speaking about what people are doing to improve the patient experience across the board in healthcare. That could be financially. So a lot of our episodes, we do talk to financial leaders to figure out like what they're doing to improve the financial experience. But it could be operationally, it could be in the clinical setting with doctors and things like that. And as far as I'm concerned, we do have, I think, just generally speaking within the healthcare industry, we just need to drive awareness. Like, we need everyone in the C-suite to know who AccessOne is and how we can help. And the hope is that if the more people broadly who know us and can kind of rely on us for, here are the best practices and the best information about how you can improve the patient experience, whether that is something like, how do you serve better food in the hospital, right? Like, executive leaders care about those things because they care about making sure the patients are happy and keeping patients happy. And there's a lot of different ways within a health system that you can shift those levers. And then one level down from that is like, do we actually want to have a show that actually might appeal to patients and patient advocates and things like that? Because to your point, we have sometimes opportunities come in that develop where we find out, okay, well, how did we get on your radar? Like, we've never even heard of you, blah, blah, blah. And they're like, well, we had patients who used you at another health, like they used you to pay their bills at another system. And they've come and they've talked to the billing. They're like, well, why aren't you using AccessOne? And so we have gotten these like little signals, like here and there, where the patients who have used us successfully advocating to their other health system somewhere that doesn't even know who we are. So we've gotten some of those. And so we've thought about it, but we kind of come back to, dipping our toes into like direct to consumer marketing towards patients, feels like a very hard challenge for us right now. So I don't know if we're quite ready to go down that road, but we have sort of like talked about it just based on some like early signals of like, should we dabble in that more? But to be honest, it's hard enough with a small team, just marketing to our buyers versus kind of like going broadly to like this whole new segment of the market, which would be like patients and not even knowing if there would be a payoff in the end.
So I'm curious, what do you find the blockers are when communicating with your buyers? Like, or like, do you find you have to explain a lot of the technical side of it?
No, I mean, like by and large, I don't think so. I think for us and for our buyers, I mean, look, some of these channels are hard, right? It's like the people have a hard job to do. There are massive labor shortages across the US in the healthcare space. A lot of our buyers are like, frankly, they're just like underwater, right? They're on a daily basis, they are expected to do a lot with very, very little. And in the last 2 or 3 years since COVID, the pandemic, they've had even less resources at their disposal. And so I think, frankly, it's just, on a daily basis when they're putting out fires and they are constantly trying their best to just make it to the end of the day, it can be a hard sell to be like, hey, do you like want to buy this thing? When they don't even have the brain space to like effectively do their job. So I think it's just like it's a very hard moment in time for our buyer, for a variety of reasons. And sometimes, trying to sell to people who are in survival mode can be just a very difficult thing to overcome.
Have you tried doing like kind of sort of more interactive marketing, like for example, gamification and similar things to try and, I guess, like improve the engagement and like highlight kind of the benefit, or is that like roadmap or?
No, I mean, like, we're still trying to nail the basics, but what I would say is I do think about this sometimes where like games and gamification are certainly like underused. And I think for our industry where our product can be very complicated, right? Our buyer has a very complicated environment where they're dealing with, if I do X, that's going to impact Y. If I do that, they're thinking about like these minute things that are impacting their world on a daily basis. And so I do think like there is, and I've thought about this of like, when you have those like awesome games that, like simulations almost where it's like you can like take our product almost and it's like we're trying to improve the revenue at your health system. So, okay, if you add more bodies to the call center, if you do this, if you like, what are all those factors, and like almost kind of create like a simulation where they could see like the actual tangible benefit of like, okay, and if we did third party patient financing, like how would that impact my overall revenue and the patient satisfaction and all of these things that they're thinking about. Like, I actually think like our industry is so complex that like having some sort of like game type scenario gamification thing, if I could get like my buyers to like play it.
Yeah, but it would be more like smaller touch points, like it doesn't have to be like a proper simulation. It could be like in one way to get more traction, like work on the acquisition, the awareness. So if you, for example, just to attract people to your podcast, you could use a quiz, you could use like gamified experiences just to grab attention to people onto your media, your podcast, your marketing campaigns.
Yeah.
And then even at the app level, without going into something too complex or a simulation, let's say someone has been paying the monthly cost of the healthcare bill, like, I don't know, like 3 months in a row or 6 months in a row, or just completed the payment. It could be like some sort of small rewards, or even like, because you are working in partnership with the hospitals, telling them maybe if someone is sticking to the bill, paying on time, and so on, maybe give like a really small discount, or give like, you know what I mean? Like it's more like giving interactions to people to make it a positive thing at the end of the day, even though the process can be painful. And I agree that, when you have to pay for your healthcare across 12 months, that's pretty bad. But let's try to make it better maybe.
Yeah, I love that. I think certainly like in our product, doing some of that, incentivizing, if you keep making payments or X number of payments on time or things like that, that's, I think certainly like on the product side could be a huge differentiator. Like, I mean, even in healthcare too, like getting someone to, even if you're like, hey, here's this manageable monthly payment for 12 months, sometimes it is hard getting them to even like get to the end of that 12 months. Like, that it can also be a challenge. So I'm doing those little different things where you're kind of offering the carrot. And I think in healthcare, sometimes we go too quickly to the stick versus the carrot, where you can kind of offer them, like little discounts and things like that to rewards or whatever it is. Even something as dumb as free parking the next time they have to go to the hospital.
Anything, anything would work. It just makes the experience a bit more, positive.
Yeah.
Are you ready for some more quick fire questions, James?
Always. Let's do it.
So this is this is really just a dolled up version of hot or not, but I'm calling it viral or vile. So it's basically, are these marketing campaigns exhibiting genius level IQ, or are they swings and a miss? So left Twix or right Twix, James?
This one I actually don't get. And I've been thinking about it actually a lot since Halloween. For probably like 2 weeks now, all the Twix had like the left or the right. And I was like, I don't understand this at all. And I had to like Google it to figure out like what the hell was the left or the right. And it was like this weird thing where apparently Twix, when they used to sell them like two in the package, they said the left was different than the right Twix. Like they tasted differently or they were made differently.
So
And,
this has been historically baked into the Twix recipe. Is that what they're claiming?
yeah, that's what they're claiming. That like the left is like a crunchy biscuit with soft caramel. The right one is like, whatever. And so like from a brand thing, like you got to kind of know that backstory of like Twix claims that the left and the right are like slightly different to even understand what the left and the right means. And so you get this and you're like on the wrapper, if you don't know that context, you're like, what the hell is this? I don't understand. And it's so not
I never
obvious
noticed
enough.
the difference.
For instance, like the Coke with the name on the bottle is kind of dumb, but it's brilliant because it's like
It was fun.
you
It's
buy
fun.
enough to like find your name, or if you find your friend's name or something, you buy one to give it to them and save for later. And it's like you don't need any sort of deep level thinking to figure out like the name on the can is like this marketing thing that's going to get you to buy more Coke. The left Twix and the right Twix, it's like you need a PhD to figure out like what the hell is the strategy behind it. And it's like, and it's so not obvious. And yeah, so to me, like complete miss. I'm like, I don't get it. They need to go back to the drawing board. 0 out of 10, as far as I'm concerned.
Wow, that is savage.
Yeah.
I don't know. I do think on some level, it's like, I've never thought about it before until I saw your post on LinkedIn, actually. Yeah. I didn't even know about it. But then I was thinking like, I've partaken in many a Twix in my time, and
Delicious.
I've never really thought about, it's great. I've never thought, like, what's the left and what's the right? I think conceptually it's almost interesting, but I know what you mean. It doesn't quite hold water when you scrutinize it, and it kind of frustrates you.
I think there's like definitely something there. Don't get me wrong. Like there's definitely something there, but like it's almost like they needed to have that campaign where they, like, if everybody knew that there was this thing where like the left was different than the right,
like if it was an urban myth already,
or was an urban myth. Yeah,
or like how like the different color of M&Ms are supposed to, like they say it's the same, but people think they taste different, like that kind of vibe.
Yeah, right. And that's a great large example where M&M could do definitely something on the different colors and whatever. So maybe it's just the fact that it's like a Twix, and the Twix is maybe not the most popular. I mean, don't get me wrong. Like I love Twix.
Sorry, I didn't mean to. Maybe
that's my favorite one.
Maybe in the US it's not big, but over here Twix is where it's at. Like
in the UK,
yeah, for
like,
me, Twix is first in front of Mars and Snickers. Easy.
Oh, really? All right.
I'm a Bueno man.
You're a what?
Okay.
Kinder Bueno.
Yeah, I don't know.
Do you know that? No. Oh, that's an absolute banger. Worth looking out for.
It's from Italy. Yeah, it's fair.
Yeah. Keeping it sugary. Coca-Cola's Create Real Magic campaign with generative AI. What do you think of that bad boy?
I think it's a complete home run. So normally, like the big brand AI, whatever I would sort of tend to like roll my eyes at. But what Coke did really well for that campaign is they had like a really great ad that they put out before, right? So it's like the dude who's in the museum. So there's this like really great like Coke ad where this guy is in an art museum and he's like drawing or whatever. And maybe he falls asleep, but eventually like the art comes to life and in the museum. So it's a bunch of famous works of art that come to life. I think including Andy Warhol's Coca-Cola is kind of in the ad. And so one of the paintings grabs the Coke and passes it around the museum to all the different famous paintings. And eventually the guy wakes up and like he's inspired to like do his own art. Right. So they had like this kind of fun on brand, just art ad that I think was relatively popular enough, but it was popular enough that like I had actually seen it. And so like I was vaguely
That's
aware
kind
of
of
like,
like the with TV ads today. That is kind of like a real watermark if you've actually seen it, because
yeah,
it's easy to miss them now, isn't it?
so easy to miss it.
Yeah.
And so there was that. And then it was kind of like, okay, now they have this like UGC AI, here's like use our digital assets to create like your own Coke work of art, like with Coke. And the best part about it is like if you win, if you're like the designer or the person who like wins the contest, like your ad is going to get shown in Piccadilly Circus and in Times Square. And so there's like a real incentive if you are a creative in that world to like do something completely banging on behalf of Coke. Because like if you are like, yes, my Coke ad was shown in Times Square, Piccadilly Circle, that's a good calling card. You're going to use that to like advance your career no matter where you go. And
Stick that right on the top of your CPA. Yeah.
What's that? Yeah, it would be right at the top.
Yeah.
And so from like a Coke perspective, it's like, they win, they get like free content from people. The people who are entering the contest, in theory, like they're winning something. So to me, I think it all sort of ties together.
Again, it's another ad campaign that's used gamification fantastically to just leverage that competitive spirit with like just a massive cross section. The generative AI just opening it up to basically anyone. Like really good. So we've got some closing questions for you, James. So looking back on your career, what would you pinpoint as being your biggest achievement and why?
I think probably my biggest achievement, I think the thing that I'm still like very proud of. So when I was at Athena Health, which is another healthcare tech company, back in 2016, we launched a media property. And so I think if you're spend any amount of time in sort of the content marketing circles these days, there's a lot of people who are like, you have to be a media company and this and that. I think to me, like that's still, we did that 7 years ago, 8 years ago by now. And we were so far ahead of the curve in terms of kind of content strategy where we were kind of trying to be a media company. And that's probably still the proudest thing that I've been a part of. I mean, we had a huge team it was not like a 1-person effort. It was a 12-person effort. And I think every person who was part of that initiative, I think would probably look back on it fondly. I mean, it was a bunch of like A players kind of all in the trenches together, truly trying to push the envelope and do something spectacular. And we were doing that back in 2016.
Well, let me take you from dizzying highs to shattering lows next. What was your biggest misstep and how would you tackle it differently, knowing what you know now and what you learned from it?
So I think probably like the biggest misstep I think I've had, and to be sure, a career full of them. But I think when I was hired by Q Squared, so this is a little startup that was making the mobile payment product that eventually got bought by AccessOne. So when I started there, we were a bootstrapped startup and I had a very minimal budget, but I was like, man, this company has like no presence on Google. And so at the time I was kind of like, okay, I'm going to devote some of my budget to like SEO and building out content and stuff that can be found by Google. And, I was spending probably a third of my budget every month just on content creation and things like that, and going after trying to like build a moat of like, searchable content and all that. The owners eventually sold the company like 8 months into this. And so I do look at that, like when I look back, I'm like, my biggest failure, I think, is if I had any inkling that they were going to sell the company as quickly as they did, I probably wouldn't have invested in SEO at all. I was kind of doing it to think about like, okay, like where do I want to be a year from now? This is going to be like my long-term bet. And I probably wouldn't have invested as much or at all. I probably honestly would have just pumped all that money into like paid ads to get like as much new business and awareness. 8 months from now, we're going to sell the company. I probably would have done whatever I could to like get as much new business in the door as quickly as possible. And I probably would have taken a very different approach. So I think about that failure because I think like one of the big things as a marketer is you got to be crystal clear and aligned with the business goals of your, like the leadership and the board and the company. You got to know what the business goals are so that you can like create your strategy based on that. And I think where I failed is I thought I was clear on what the business strategy was. And I think I probably should have been even more clear than I probably was. So I think for me, it was like a failure of understanding what our founders and the, leadership wanted to achieve. And like, to be clear, it worked. Like when we got bought, the AccessOne, the SEO person, when they did like the audit of Q Squared, they were like, man, like you were doing all this as like one person and like that, like incredible, like the SEO result and the keywords and all that stuff. But like, I just wouldn't have done it had,
Did they keep it? Did they keep it? Because they could have kept it and redirect content and things like that, or did they just like?
We did. And then last year we did a rebrand. So last October, we kind of folded everything into the AccessOne and shut the Q Squared site down. But yeah.
I've got one final question for you today, James. So what's the single best piece of marketing advice you've ever been given? And do you think you could improve upon it for our listeners?
I still think about this a lot. And it came from my first kind of manager and mentor, a gentleman by the name of John Fox. Brilliant guy. He's like a Harvard PhD anthropologist. He's like written books and made documentaries. And he has this phenomenal company called Slipstream, where they do like documentary style videos and stories for B2B brands. Probably one of the finest content creators I've ever known, will know, and the kind of guy where you just like want to bring your best self like each and every day because you're like, man, this guy is brilliant. I do not want to let him down. He was like, don't let perfect be the enemy of good. And what he basically meant was like, look, at marketing, you got to ship fast. If something is like 80% good enough, like get it out the door. Don't futz around for that other 20%. Don't worry about perfection. Like sometimes it's better to just get something live and shipped versus trying to have something that is not available and perfect. And I don't think I could improve upon it.
Thanks very much for your time and sharing your expertise with us. Where can people find you?
Like every other marketer in this world now, like LinkedIn, right? So you can find me on LinkedIn, slide into my DMs. Very, very easy to find there. And yeah, I'd say that's probably the best place to find me.
Cool. Excellent. Thank you very much for your time.
Awesome. Guys, thanks so much for having me on. This is awesome. I really appreciate it. It's been a great conversation. So thanks so much.
Dreamify.